short background. For 9 years, Nicolas was director of the AGBU. He's no longer involved in the AGBU. He's the chairman of the Committee of Armenians in Belgium. And he's a political advisor and advocacy expert. He's also done research on the diaspora. In fact, his PhD is on the diaspora. And I look forward to reading that one day. And maybe you will share it with us as well once again.
Yeah, you forgot to say the PhD on the way.
On the way. all PhDs are on the way. I think there's all people here who are working on the PhDs. So anyway, thanks very much for coming. Contact me by email. So, Nicolas, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for the invitation and to all of you for coming for this presentation, for this discussion. I think I'll stay standing here rather than sit at the chair, however inviting it seems. And thanks for the very kind presentation, Lisa. Now, I don't know whether you've noticed, but we changed the title of the talk at some point. I guess the new title sounded more ambitious, but not to worry, the point of the talk has not changed. It's still going to be about what sort of thing the diaspora is, how it perceived is, and how what we say about it matters. So that's the topic. The starting point, I think you invited me in December, Lisa, or thereabouts. And at that time, I think still now, the mood in the Armenian world has been a little bit gloomy. The Artsakh war has had a depressing effect on all of us, I suspect, as have the political quarrels in Armenia. The victory in the Artsakh war in 1994 was credited by some who have liberated Armenians from their victim projects. The twin states of Armenia and Artsakh had come to embody the hopes of many. Now those hopes have been set back. Meanwhile, the diaspora is often viewed as a relic of the past. 30 years of focus on the state of Armenia and on the fate of the Republic of Armenia have led to a certain neglect of the diaspora also, and of its institutions as a vehicle for Armenian identity. In this atmosphere, I brought you a few pictures. Actually, I think all of them are pictures that I made myself to illustrate what I've seen. So this is a large demonstration we organized during the war. I don't need to show you pictures, I suppose, of what happened during the war. But this is a reflection of the depressed mood at the time. So in this atmosphere, some of us may have to feel despondent. What might be a point of our exertions if they are doomed to failure? Is the diaspora a spent force? Is Armenia destined to become a failed state? Is it condemned to forever be the battlefield between Russia and Turkey? These are important questions, some of which I would like to address with you. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the political scientist Benedict Anderson and his expression, the phrase he coined, the imagined communities. This is in reference to nations and to nationalism. His point was to underline that nations do not exist as objects in nature. They're not actually united by blood or even ancestry. They exist only because the idea of the nation has taken hold of people's minds. Britishness, for instance, exists only in our minds, and in the symbols we produce and share, such as flags, passports, and maps. Anderson stresses, however, that although they are imagined, nations are not imaginary. They're in fact very real. If nations are socially constructed, so can diasporas be. And so is what we call sometimes the global Armenian nation. And Khachik Tolonian, a specialist on diasporas in general, including the Armenian diaspora, calls it the permanent Armenian translation. And whatever term you prefer to use, this translation, like any nation, exists only to the extent that it exists in our minds. And it will continue to exist if and only if we continue to believe that it does. So I hope I've made the point. What we believe matters to what we will become. And that is why I thought it would be useful to dedicate some time, the time we will spend together, to explore some of the unique opportunities which the diaspora story has to offer. And as you'll see, I'll be referring to the Armenian diaspora, but not only. In engaging with in this exercise, I claim mostly credentials as a practitioner. As you may know, I worked for 9 years, or as Misak just said, I've worked for 9 years as the European Director of AGBU Europe, and I'm currently the chairman of the Armenian Committee in Belgium. Both are hugely rewarding, as well as intensely frustrating responsibilities. They demand a lot of time and emotional energy, and like others, I would like to know that our efforts are well spent. For that, we need to know where we're going. Nation states seem more dominant today than they ever were. It seems that only they have the resources, the institutions, and the legitimacy to address the problems of the world. Must we therefore draw the conclusion that we're living through the sunset of diasporas? In the 1970s, the state of Israel was still a new creation, and the Jewish world had begun to doubt the future of its diaspora. That is when French Jewish writer Richard Marienstrass published a series of essays on the subject. And of those Zionists who believed the diaspora to be a thing of the past, he wrote that, I quote, "They invest the state of Israel with the myth of the eternity of the Jewish people. They sacralize the state in an almost totalitarian fashion. They ignore the obvious fact that, if dispersion is the cause of misfortune, it is also thanks to that dispersion, and not in spite of it, that the Jews have survived other nations, and that it is dispersion that made them, as it were, invulnerable, even if it exposed to the sword of history every separate part of this community. Nothing guarantees the lives of cultures, nations, or states. Just think of the number of nations that have disappeared in the last 2,000 years. We truly believe that the existence of Israel, that Jewish existence in Israel, does not run. Do we truly believe this? That the existence of Jews in Israel does not run as big a risk as in the diaspora. That's the end of the quote. He had a point. Marianne had a point. Diasporas have played a considerable role throughout history, but that role is downplayed today. Two other authors, two French authors, Mathieu Monge and Nathalie Luchy, recently published The Europe of Diasporas. In this unique book, they show what an important role diasporas have played in the development of Europe. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the diasporas lived everywhere in Europe, in communities disseminated by history. The Judeo-Spanish, the Greeks, the Armenians, but also the Calvinists, Mennonites, Hussites, Huguenots, and many others. The authors claim that it is those diasporas, those communities' capacity to resist distance for several generations which differentiates diasporas from other migrations and minorities of the 16th to 18th centuries. These diasporas are characterized by their elaboration of common history and memory, and by the investment in factors of unity such as language, architecture, and so on. So the Armenian diaspora, or even the Jewish diaspora, were not the exception at the time. It was a widespread phenomenon. At the time, diaspora communities in each city maintained communications with those that were established elsewhere in Europe. And these networks were used in trade, for the exchange of information and ideas, and for migration. These communities were indeed neither transnational nor unstructured. They were organized and maintained their institutions, their identity, their history, and their values. Diasporas were often caused by political upheavals, but they prospered because they succeeded in playing an important role as networks to transfer goods, ideas, and knowledge. And the next illustration shows, it's a map I think from Tavitian's Atlas of the Armenian Diaspora, which shows the first emigration, and I'm going to talk about the first Armenian diaspora that started with the emigration out of Hamaink. The Armenians are one of the classical diasporas in European history. After the fall of Hamaink in 1075, significant numbers settled in German settlements in the Crimea. Okay. From there, they travelled inland to other parts of Eastern Europe, and particularly to Kiev and Rus, so the early Russia based in Kiev, to Transylvania and territories controlled by the Polish crown at the time. In time, large and prosperous Armenian communities developed in such cities as Venice, Genoa, and Livorno in modern-day Italy, Amsterdam in the Netherlands, Marseille in France, St. Petersburg and Moscow in Russia, Lvov, Chernovsky and Kamianets-Podolsky in today's Ukraine, Krakow in Poland, in today's Poland, Bucharest, Armenopolis and Suceava in today's Romania, and in many other places. And I'm just talking about Europe here, because the list would be even longer if we cover the Middle East and South Asia. In these lands, so the lands where the Armenians settled, they formed long-lasting merchant communities and trade networks. Ukrainian historian Yaroslav Dashkevich writes of the Armenians in the Kingdom of Poland, and you know, Poland of the Middle Age covered much of today's Ukraine, and it was the power in the region at the time. So of the Armenians in the Kingdom of Poland, he writes, the importance of the Armenians in what is today Ukraine, and what's in Poland, was determined not by their numbers, but by the role they played in the economy. A great part of the profitable trade with the East was in their hands. They were also important in local commerce, dealing in handicraft and in luxury goods, and particularly in furs and textiles. Armenian commercial networks, so that's the end of the quote. Armenian commercial networks indeed played an important economic role throughout Europe, as well as in Eurasia. By the 17th century, Armenians controlled an estimated 86% of raw silk imports into Europe. 86%. They also controlled a significant part of the trade in precious stones. And at one point, Armenian merchants imported almost as much cotton into France as the French East India Company itself. In those days, cotton came from the East, not from the West. These trade networks also contributed to the transfer of know-how and knowledge to Europe. Armenian merchants helped the French to learn the Indian calico printing technology, for instance. They contributed to disseminating coffee in Europe. In 1654, Pascal Haroutiou opened the first coffee houses in France, first in Marseille and then in Paris. And other Armenians opened the first coffee houses and introduced coffee into Austria, or into Vienna and Prague. There is every reason to believe that diaspora networks remain valuable assets today, both for their members, whom they provide with ideas, know-how, and international connection, and for the societies that surround them, which they also connect and enrich. The sociologist Robin Cohen, also a specialist on diasporas, imagines that in the age of globalization, the world is being organized vertically by nation states, but horizontally by an overlapping, permeable, multiple circle of interactions, of which diasporas are a part. And another sociologist, Mr. Kotkin, concludes on this subject that in an ever more transnational and highly competitive world economy, highly dependent on the flow and acquisition of knowledge, societies that nurture the presence of diasporas seem most likely to flourish. We'll move on. Yeah, before I move on to the next topic, you have a couple of other maps of the spread of Armenians. I don't know if you recognize this, but this would be the spread of Armenians in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Julpa merchant network mostly. So that's what sometimes they call the second diaspora. And after the genocide, Armenians spread to the whole world. One way to represent the diaspora. Does anybody recognize this place? It's the town of Plovdiv, which was one of the nodes in Bulgaria, one of the nodes in the Greek Dimension network, but also an area of old Armenian settlement. So it's one of the historic semi-Armenian, partly Armenian towns in Europe. And it's a town where you have a church, an ancient church, but also uniquely an Armenian cemetery, specifically Armenian cemetery. So if you're ever in Bulgaria, it's worth visiting Plovdiv. This is the town hall of Warsaw. The Armenians in Poland published a book where they showed that about a third of the town hall is of course on the town square, and in medieval towns the town square was where all the rich and powerful people and guilds resided, and a third of the houses were built by Armenians and owned by Armenians in the late Middle Ages. This is an AGBU picture, also from Warsaw, with a number of people from around Europe. Yes, I guess here I had a few illustrations of the diaspora. This is the Varjaran. What is it called in Istanbul?
School.
Sorry?
The school.
The school, yes. What is it called? Dientronagan Varjaran, yes. Right. So these are just to make the diaspora and its heritage in Europe a little bit alive, to give a few pictures. The second topic is Diaspora Internationalism. The second topic I would like to approach. In spite of this important contribution to the Armenians and generally diaspora's important contribution to the development of Europe, its states did not always nurture warm feelings for diasporas, or for Armenians in particular. The English writer Christopher Walker, you're probably familiar with him, shows how the state's perceived interest found expression in representations and narratives. He claims that the Crimean War, I'm sure you've seen this cartoon before, he claims that the Crimean War, that after the Crimean War, the Armenians came to be viewed primarily through the prism of Britain's rivalry with Russia. In his book, Visions of Ararat, he tells how Armenia's cause lost out when the England of empire and wealth pretensions started to demand attention. Just as in the days of the Cold War, it wasn't quite cricket for a Westerner to say anything too favorable about Armenia, so in the long 19th century, from 1791 to 1914, to express interest. Can you see the picture by the way? So in the long 19th century, to express interest in Armenia or to voice sympathy for her historic issues was to invite a slur of pro-Russianism, a hint of traitorousness at a time when Russia was the great imperial rival of Britain. Gladstone was upbraided for being unpatriotic by Queen Victoria, an arch-hater. So Queen Victoria was the arch-hater of Eastern Christians. A note in this quote, Armenia of course refers to the Armenian minority in Turkey and Russia. There was obviously no Armenian state. The sentiments propagated at the time in Germany about the Armenians were expressed in coarser terms. From the late 19th century, the German Empire sought to rival the British and assiduously courted the Sultan and sought partnership between Germany and the Ottomans. Attitudes were soon shaped to reflect the state's options and vilify the Armenians. So at that time, starting in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, the Armenians were routinely portrayed as bloodsuckers and parasites in Germany, whose eradication was therefore quite forgivable. Some German writers and journalists at the time routinely referred to the Armenians as the Jews of the Orient, with obvious derogatory implications. Powerful nation-states dedicate considerable resources to creating their own legend and to locking their citizens into its limited horizon. Powerful nation-states dedicate considerable resources to creating their own legend and to locking their citizens into its limited horizon. This mental bubble blinds them to alternative perspectives, and it is through the prisms of power that they understand matters related to smaller peoples, including the Armenians. The more powerful the country, it seems, the more likely it is to confuse the interests of the world with its own. The view from the vantage point of an imperial center is often mistaken for an internationalist perspective. And I dare not make comparisons with politics nowadays, but I'm sure you can all think of examples of this phenomenon. So this phenomenon, whereby one group or institution dominates the common discourse and worldview, is referred to as hegemony. Those groups who are subjected to this hegemony tend to internalize the perspective of the power center and hence internalize their own inferior status. Sociologist Stuart Hall calls this the inner expropriation of cultural identity. Diaspora communities are almost inevitably subject to hegemony in the states where they live. They have therefore been on the defensive. They thought themselves to be on the losing side of history. But there is more. Whereas states claim to provide peace, order, prosperity, and civilization, diasporas are often portrayed as conflict-prone, particularistic, tribal, and generally nefarious. The French Jewish writer Marianne Strass, whom I've already quoted at the beginning of the presentation, describes a widespread attitude towards diasporas and minorities. And if you don't mind, I'll quote him again. He writes in French, and the translation is by me, but hopefully he writes very, very well. And I did my best in the translation. The disappearance of a minority is seen as a natural phenomenon, he writes. Just like the gradual succession of brush and woodland as it takes over a field that is left fallow. The minority, by contrast, is artificial. Worse, it is monstrous. It must constantly produce reasons for its survival. What does it contribute? How does it justify its existence in the face of history, which seeks its destruction? Against progress, which denies it? Against the thousands so-called liberators? Why resist the inexorable course of events, the direction of history, and the necessary and beneficial violence of redeeming universalism? I would like to argue with Marianne Strass and other advocates of diasporas that we have in fact been misled. If we are to seriously compare the record of states and diasporas in connecting the world and promoting understanding among its peoples, states cannot stand the comparison with diasporas. There is indeed much evidence that diasporas represent a tremendous intellectual opening into the wider world, and that such a diaspora as the Armenians, in fact, provide access to a form of global citizenship. The geographical diversity of diasporas, I'm not sure if the European Parliament qualifies as a form of international citizenship, but that's the best I could find. The geographical diversity of diasporas helps us connect with and understand the perspectives of people in different countries. Rachik Pelolian, him again, writes that the Armenian diaspora penetrates and is penetrated by a variety of nation states. That's an obvious fact. This interpenetration is a material fact, shaping their lives by daily contact with the host society, culture and state, and above all, with its economy. That's the end of the quote. Our families and friends are connected with the Americas, North and South, the Russian-speaking world, Europe, South Asia, and the Middle East, and many of us speak several languages. That network has given us such a broad perspective that we can neither really choose sides nor be the enemies of the world. Our connection with the world is not just a fact. It is also a form of cultural practice, according to Pelolian again. He refers to the Armenian discourse, which takes note sometimes in cosmopolitan and thoughtful, and sometimes in alarmed fashion, of events in homeland, hostlands, and throughout the world. Much of the diasporic sphere is devoted to discourse on such issues. Then there are a few quotes, and I hope you'll forgive me for that, but they're expressing these facts very well. Robin Cohen, also already cited, talks of the bridging role of diasporas. He refers to a particular skill, which he describes as follows. Many members of diaspora communities can spot what is missing in the societies they visit and in which they settle. Often they are better able to discern what their own group shares with other groups, and when its cultural norms and social practices threaten majority groups. In other words, they can relate to different cultural perspectives with maybe greater ease. In this, these authors do not diverge much from Immanuel Kant and his judgment on the Armenians from the 1789 study of anthropology from a pragmatic point of view. And this is a well-known quotation, so some of you may have heard it already. Among another Christian people, the Armenians, reigns a certain commercial spirit of a special kind. They wander on foot from the borders of China all the way to Cape Corso on the coast of Guinea to carry on commerce. Thanks to this spirit, this particular branch of an industrious and intelligent people, who in a line from northeast to southwest, travel almost the whole extent of the ancient continent, know how to secure a peaceful reception by all the people they encounter. So, these are different ways of expressing a certain type of intercultural skills the Armenians allegedly cultivate, at least if you believe these authors. Diasporans in this tradition are fortunate to be able to view the world from different perspectives and to escape the tunnel vision of a state-centric vision. This is probably the truest form of internationalism, and it deserves to be nurtured and cultivated. And I move on to contrasting between old and new diasporas. The Armenians being among the old diaspora category. I referred I've already referred to dominant or hegemonic discourses that tend to disparage diasporas. But the experience of the Armenian diaspora is also an issue because it is often ignored and shouldn't be. Armenians are not alone in being attached to their cultural identity, as the traditional diasporas have been joined by vast numbers of immigrants to Western Europe over the past 50 years, or maybe more. And that's true for the whole of Western Europe. Each new generation must face difficult choices. Each new generation of these immigrants must face difficult choices with implications for their identity, such as their place of socialization, residence, education, and so on. And I'll show you a picture. I wonder whether there's no reason why you would know where this is. This is the famous Brussels borough of Molenbeek that has become symbolic. Molenbeek rings a bell with anybody?
Yes.
You know about it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Extremists.
Yes, this is some of the terrorists that placed bombs in Paris.
Sure.
Came from there. So it became famous. So it's one of the areas where there are a lot of immigrants in Brussels. On matters of identity and immigration, Western European countries generally frame their attitude with the following two options. One conservative approach demands that the children of immigrants give up their identity of origin, in favour of that of their new country's national identity. The goal is assimilation. Another approach, multiculturalism, accepts that each group should hold on to its culture and identity. However, neither of these two options suitably addresses the dilemma which immigration and life in the diaspora pose to the second and to subsequent generations. The first denies the younger generation their family history and heritage to shoehorn them into a stereotypical national identity devoid of nuances, devoid of depth and history and roots. The second option, multiculturalism, tends to lock them up into a supposed cultural community and entrust them to community institutions whose legitimacy, qualifications and ambitions are often disputable. Both multiculturalism and assimilation are inadequate options. This polarized public debate has rarely drawn on the Armenian experience, or indeed on the experience of other diasporas, and it totally ignores the reality of diasporic existence. The idea of distinguishing between diasporic identity and that of the state of residence is not new to most Armenians. Nor is the experience of living alongside people of different identities, cultures and faiths. As Tavitian recalls, diasporas have often developed with time portable diasporic institutions such as the church and community councils of the Armenians. Just in case you forgot what a church looked like, this is the Armenian church in Kiev, I think. No, in Kharkov, in Eastern Europe, for Ukraine. The church and the community councils of the Armenians, and these portable institutions can easily be established in new countries. As a result, the integration of Armenians in the societies they migrated to has rarely been an issue. And besides the church, what are the traditional, what exists in every community? Sorry?
School, community center.
Yes, yeah, that's right. That's the school and community center in Odessa. And just random place I wasn't going to show you, maybe. And this is a new element, a new institution in more and more cities. You have a touchdown. But new, I don't know, over the last 20, 30 years. Before that, we didn't have monuments. So that experience of establishing new communities and the portable institutions, that experience is a valuable resource and a model for our contemporaries. The diasporic mindset is indeed, in my opinion, at least part of the solution to the dilemma of diversity which Western European societies are confronted with, and it is part of the solution to many of the conflicts, though often passionate and sometimes violent, that this duality has generated. We have something else here to share and to teach our contemporaries, and it is time we did so. And the fourth topic, I think that's all with the pictures, is the question of diaspora and power, which I would like also to briefly cover. And what do we have to do? So I've so far tried to show the important contribution diasporas have made to the development of the regions where they were established. I've tried to show that their cosmopolitan mindset is an asset for ourselves, for the diasporas, and also for the societies where they live. This leads us to ask the obvious question: if they are so beneficial, why do diasporas seem to have lost ground in the last 150 years? The erosion of the Armenian diasporas, when I say why do diasporas, I mean the classical diasporas seem to have lost ground. The erosion of the Armenian diaspora's prestige and institutions was not the effect of time or of natural erosion. Quite the contrary, diasporas were aggressively combated by the emerging power of nation states. States have sought full control, as Robin Cohen, you've noticed I've quoted him quite a lot, and I hope you'll excuse me. As Robin Cohen tells us, since the state structures first cohered, the leaders of nation states sought it all their own way. They coped with ethnic diversity by demanding exclusive citizenship, border control, linguistic conformity, and political obedience. Moreover, the nation state was offered as an object of devotion. Its citizens were enjoined to love their country, to revere its institutions, to salute its flag, to support its sporting teams, to fight and die for it in the war. The specialist of nationalism, another specialist of nationalism, Jens Kedna, describes the well-known disastrous and tragic consequences in modern conditions of the conjunction of the economic superiority and cultural identifiability of diasporas with political and military weakness. The destruction of the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire bears out this assessment, but so do many other lesser-known historical episodes. So this is a picture of the commemorations, I think in 2014 or 2015, in Istanbul, of the Armenian genocide. They're just as a reference to the genocide. So the genocide is an obvious example of this episode of destruction of the diasporas, but it's far from the only one. The Amiras of Constantinople were a powerful Armenian merchant class that played an important role both for the Ottoman state and for the Armenians of the empire until the 19th century. Most of the Amiras were moneylenders to the Ottoman state, or Saras. In his classical study on the Amiras, Hagop writes that it was the Crimean War that put an effective end to their power and to the profession of the Saras. After the war, the Ottoman state resorted, rather unwillingly, to loans from European lending institutions. It was European banks and their representatives actively supported by their governments that brought the final demise of the Saras. And Sibu Arslanyan, who wrote on the Julpa versions, gives a similar account of the demise of the network of the Julpa versions, centered in Persia. He writes first of a mass exodus of Armenian merchants out of Isfahan. So, I mean, clearly, you know of the extent of the power and activity of the Julpa merchants. And when he describes, he analyzes why this network disappears. He writes first of the mass exodus out of Isfahan, so their capital. Julpa is in Isfahan. Following plundering, I'm so sorry. Following plundering and persecution by Nadir Shah, the Persian Shah at the time, after which both the township and the network collapsed in the late 18th century due to intense monopolizing rivalry from the English East India Company in India. Similar accounts could be given of the demise of the Armenians at Armenopolis. I don't know if you call it. So Armenopolis is a real city. Its name has been changed. It's today in Romania, in Transylvania in Romania. So the demise of the Armenians of Armenopolis, I'll tell you the story later on if you like, but I'll cut to the chase. The demise also of the Lazarev dynasty in Russia, of the Armenian bourgeoisie in Tbilisi and Baku. They were also very powerful and prosperous at one time. And at the end of the day, it is political power and often violence that destroyed these parts of the diaspora, not slow cultural erosion. In contemporary Western Europe nowadays, hegemonic discourse plays a key role in continuing to undermine the diaspora. I've provided a few examples already of instances in which the diaspora was disparaged and as nefarious or dismissed as irrelevant. That discourse is particularly visible in the political sciences and in political commentary. One of the most profound consequences of the Armenian genocide, the denial of the Armenian genocide over much of the 20th century, has been the attendant denial of the Armenian story and of the Armenians as one of Europe's tribes. Denial is the extension of the project of destruction beyond Turkey's borders. Once finally Armenians re-emerged in the public sphere with the independence of Armenia, the diaspora were quickly branded as inveterate troublemakers. Little or no evidence was provided, however. Readers of Benedict Anderson.
Furthermore, exit signals to organizations that they are failing to address the aspirations of their members. And the absence of institutional monopoly, on the other hand, means that the field is open to new initiatives to try to serve the community better, I guess. So the possibility of exit can promote emulation among community initiatives. Note also that freedom cuts both ways. Diaspora networks also make it easier to leave a country when the situation becomes difficult and to settle in a new place. This is not a theoretical option. The Syrian Armenians have experienced this, Lebanese Armenians to some extent, and many other situations. It is a well-established fact of the literature of diasporas that the existence of networks abroad, the fact that you already have some relatives abroad, makes it much easier for you to migrate if the need arises. And it is a fact, a phenomenon that Armenians are familiar with. In closing, I hope to have conveyed to you this idea that we are lucky to have inherited the diaspora and should think of making this heritage prosper. This heritage can provide us and the societies we live in with tremendous economic, professional and personal opportunities. It can help us understand the world, empathize with its peoples and provide a bridge between cultures. It can provide our societies with models to manage diversity. And it is a rare institution that is based on the freedom of choice of its members and on emulation between its institutions. The diaspora is, furthermore, an essential resource for Armenia, as is Armenia for the diaspora. A realization of the tremendous resources which the diaspora has to offer will help make it a realization of those resources will help make it as real and material as the states we live in. And this in turn will allow us to invest more and to invest maybe more wisely in the amazing institution that is the diaspora.